As of recording this video yesterday, a brand new patch just came out that allowed us to bind Spectres with the majority of the enemies that are found in Act 4. And not only was I able to find additional monsters that aren't currently listed in PoE2 database, but I went out and collected all of them. That's right, I literally collected every single one of them. I have even more in my inventory, and I even have one equipped right now. And I went out and tested all of these, because it turns out if you add about 80 some odd Spectres to the game, you're gonna have to test them to figure out if any of them are good. And I assume that other people like Gazzy as well as Trudy Toru and their primary community database is going to have a lot of this information up there. I figured it'd be good for me to do my own due diligence to go out and test all of these same things and see if I could come to some either interesting conclusions or find some niche use cases for some of these monsters. Because a lot of the monsters in these new areas are incredibly interesting and have a wide suite of various abilities. Now here's the problem though, I don't want to waste any of your time, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut to the quick and let you know whether or not we have finally dethroned the Frozen Mandible as the best Spectre. And the answer is, we really haven't. I did find one that's kind of interesting to build around, and I'll show that off at the end of the video just for people who want to see it. And funnily enough, it was actually one of the first ones that I tested. And then I proceeded to test about 76 more absolutely trash monsters. But there you go. If that's all you really wanted to know, is there a better Spectre than Frozen Mandibles? No. But if you're getting a little bit tired of this guy, or maybe you're looking to investigate some other tech that's available with some of these other monsters, go ahead and stick around for the rest of the video. But if that's all you wanted to know, enjoy the rest of your day. I hope this was helpful for you. Now let's go ahead and talk about this list of monsters and the different clans of monsters that are in them, and the ones that I've explored to see if they do anything particularly interesting with one another, because there sure was a lot of them, and a lot of them tend to fit into families of monsters. And boy howdy, did this take us a while to finish all the testing. One, I had to go collect them all, and that meant that after getting all of them done and needing 94 spirit gems of the same level, be able to compare their relative damage in concert with one another as well as with the other minions they would typically be using on a build, it took us a while. I'd say in today's stream alone, I've been testing for 8 hours, and there was another 3 or 4 hours of actually just collecting all of them on top of that. So if you appreciate that, maybe subscribe to the channel, leave a like on it as well, and leave a comment down below if you found anything that you've been trying out that maybe you haven't seen other big streamers cover in their own videos for this topic. But there was a lot of different guys here, and you'll notice that there are groups of them. So there are the Blood Fever. These were all on Wakanu Island, and they're basically the Karui that have been corrupted in the storyline. A lot of them did some interesting stuff. None of them were particularly good, though. Another really interesting group of monsters were the Tauhoa. So inside of the Eye of Inakora, you do these various trials to be able to pick up different buffs from the different Karui gods. And each one of them actually spawned unique monsters that are not currently in the database or are being added to the database as this video comes out. So I actually found ones that weren't even listed in the areas and then had to test them as well. But another really interesting, basically conflux of monsters were these Twilight Order and these Righteous and Zealous or Faithful targets. These were all in the Erastus area as well as the excavation site. And while some of them definitely have some overlap and at least one of them might see some use in the meta version of this build, a lot of these had some of the most ridiculous effects in the game and probably the most interesting suicide bombers out of all of the monsters that we've seen in the game thus far. Oh, and then there was roughly 19 different versions of those same little fetish dolls from Diablo 2 called the Kin. They all do the same thing. I don't know why they have different names and why they're wearing slightly different combinations of skulls, but they all generally just walk around and ankle stab people. But again, none of them were particularly valuable except for one of them, which I do think might see some exploration as a very interesting pseudo passive playstyle for the minion build. But out of that super big list of 94 different minions, it turns out there's really only 6 or 7 of them that I believe have any real use cases that are worth their time to be explored. So I'm just going to start in a random order and talk about why I think each one of these is variously useful. First one on the list here is going to be Swarming Wasp. And the reason why you would care about a Swarming Wasp is because at some point there's probably going to be some kind of swarm minion build. Basically taking any Spectre or minion that costs a very small amount of spirit reserve and being able to summon an absolute massive ton of them. And I think that Swarming Wasp is very quickly going to become our best swarming Spectre, but each one of these are going to cost 21 spirit. And at my 341 spirit, that means I can have a metric ton of them. Now at 16, these guys start to actually perform in some way. But the reason why these ones are particularly good is because you'll notice that they are very fast movement, so they don't get stuck behind. A lot of our very cheap Spirit Reservation minions are very, very slow. These ones also attack fast, and they do a decently small amount of damage for the fact that you can get 16 of them. But if you were to walk up to a pack of like regular monsters with these, and these don't currently have any spirit gems or quality or anything like that, you'll see that they're actually able to output a decent amount of damage. Now, this is not saying that this is somehow going to be meta. No, in fact, right now, we don't really need swarming tech, but considering these literally don't have anything if I were to move my big head, no quality, no gems or whatever, they're actually performing decently well as a swarm, and you'd be able to fit somewhere around like 10 of these onto your build while running the typical suite of other skeletons. So I think that this one should be at the top of the list of things that might have a use case if we ever get to the point where adding a huge amount of flat damage onto our minions via our Scepter is a relevant meta strategy. The next interesting summon is the Twilight Order Officer. These guys do a lot of different things. They're a decent melee damage dealer. They have a big war cry that they do that I can't seem to make actually affect anything in the game, but they actually have a lightning slam attack that does a decent amount of damage, converts a lot of it over to lightning. But what's interesting is that after they use this attack, they gain an aura, which actually increases all of your minions' damage within their area by 10%. Now, they are a little bit expensive at my current reservation. They would cost me 51 spirit, but basically if I bring them out, and again, these don't have any support gems, I'm not trying to highlight the damage that they deal, but that attack, that does absolutely nothing. But this lightning slam here, which first off just looks like insanely cool, absolutely one of my favorite looking particle effects. The scream does nothing, but by doing this lightning slam, if this guy can stop freaking out, there you go, they now gain an aura. It seems to be for about like 6 or 7 seconds. They increase all minion damage by 10%. If we get to the point where being able to fit in another skill would make sense on the build, this aura is one of the few ways that we could continue to bolster their damage, as well as just having like a decent frontline tank on top of that. I figured I have to call out the Elephant Tortoise because this is just another really big boy, and it is strictly worse than the Cocaine Ant as it is right now. If the Cocaine Ant ever were to get nerfed, maybe Elephant Tortoise would see some use, but they do a decent amount of cleaving damage. They have a big stomp as well, but I mostly like them because they are just gargantuanly huge, and you can actually get these guys to get even bigger. But they have decent mobility speed, so they're keeping up with me while I run, and then when they actually start to attack, they do a big slam, they do multiple cleaving attacks as well. They're just massive tanks on top of all of that. Again, strictly worse than the Cocaine Ant, but I mostly want to call them up because one, they're just so hilariously large, but two, they actually do have decent AoE damage on their main attacks here. And they just look absolutely hilarious when they run through on everything. Spiked Ray is going to round out the last of the utility-based summons that we could actually use here. Right now, a lot of people are using Powered Zealot because it's very efficient at being able to apply shock. Spiked Ray is a very interesting monster in that it has a primary attack, which is basically a lightning bolt that it fires. This lightning bolt always pierces, and that's the only attack that it does. So considering this has an infinite range piercing lightning attack, if you were to stack on a bunch of shock magnitude and decent enough damage, it might actually be a really good tool for applying shock. They're not necessarily the fastest, but they don't really have to be. They just fire off this massive lightning beam that, again, just pierces through everything. It naturally pierces, so you don't have to support that in any way. And actually has a really big hitbox as well. So I think that this would be a really good tool for being able to apply shock if you actually put like shock magnitude and shock damage. You see that this guy was instantly shocked there. So it does seem like this would be a pretty good tool. I personally have not had enough spirit to be able to run Powered Zealot on my build. So I haven't been able to compare it. But I'm going to go grab one of those guys and just see what the relative uptime of shock is between the two of them. But this seems like a really good tool in case you've come across it and you can afford it. These two are strictly just hilarious. I don't know of a way to make them work, but they are bananas level ridiculous looking. We're going to start off with the Courser. The Courser is a very funny guy. You can have a lot of them. They're very slow. If there was ever a way to make these guys actually move faster, you could actually use something like swap tech. So if you've never seen swap tech, basically you turn it so that they're not summoned on your swap. You swap over to a different setup. And then as you run forward and you want to drop them down into things and you don't get knocked over, let me just like run up next to these guys right here. And then you swap back to your primary setup. They will all spawn if they haven't died recently. And then the moment that they drop down, they do this. which is just absolutely ridiculous amounts of AoE and lightning damage. Now, this isn't good. It's just ridiculous. It is absolutely astounding amount of damage. Now, if you would actually put skill gems onto this, obviously they're going to be doing a lot more damage. Just the typical AI of them is like way too slow. This is how fast they move. And they tend to engage this effect the moment that they see anybody. So they just drop it down right on top of them and then just kind of stand there and the monsters haven't even come into melee range. I don't think that there's a really good way to use these. I like the idea of just like airdropping them on top of people to be able to do damage where you just walk up and you're like, oh, hey, hello, how we doing? Boom! And then they just like absolutely obliterate something. I think it's funny. I don't think it's like a realistic way of building the build, but with no support gems on it, I mean, they're killing things in this yellow tier 15 map, so that's like, I don't know, that's got to count for something. And then the last ridiculous monster before we get to the one that's actually meta viable, this one's Zealous Excavator. Zealous Excavator looks really interesting. They got these big old orbs on them. And if you just thought the previous airdrop ship of lightning damage was something to write home about, let's go ahead and talk about these guys real quick. I'm gonna use the same tech just to be able to make it so that I can drop them on them really effectively. You can get the bird's eye view of this effect. But here you go. Here's a guy. Here's all my men. And there we go. And they all immediately explode and off themselves. They do this giant lightning attack. They do this big rock drop on top of it. And then they all die. So there's a couple things to understand about this. One, again, just one of the most ridiculous looking effects in the game. Right now, I don't expect them to be doing damage. I don't have any support gems on them. But they're a little bit stupid. But they all do this. And if they're very far away and they've like properly gained aggro, they'll actually run forward and then do this suicide attack. So again, another weird tech thing. I did notice that like if you were actually to support gem them, like right now, these are only on a 2 link and they have nothing in them. They do a decent amount of damage. Not only that, since they're dying, you could trigger things based off the fact that your minions are dying. You also get to run the support gem that says after they've recently revived, they do 30% more damage, because the moment that they revive, they just immediately do the suicide attack again. I don't think that this is legitimately a thing. I really, really don't. It's literally there because 1, it just looks stupid cool, and 2, it's absolutely hilarious that you could make a build like this. But if there is ever a point where we have support for minions dying continuously and getting a benefit out of it, this might be a very, very good tool, because I can't think of a minion that dies more efficiently than the moment that they see aggro, immediately offing themselves. Maybe you've reached the point that you've been waiting for, the actual meta option for any one of these Spectres, the one in the 94 of them that I think does a decent amount of damage and can realistically be built around. I don't think that a Lich Witch is the best version for this. It would probably be an Infernalist, because you want to have as many of these as possible. But what you're looking at is the Ancestral Channeler. Now, the reason why the Ancestral Channeler is actually so interesting is because it itself summons minions. And those minions give me like really big Studio Ghibli Princess Mononoke vibes. And you can get them to each individually spawn a megaton of these minions. And then each one of these minions shoots out cold projectiles, meaning that you can use things like wild shards so that they have a chance for each one of their projectiles to then fire out 8 projectiles. They themselves fire projectiles as well. And since they deal cold damage, you have a lot of different ways to scale it, to apply exposure, to reduce elemental resistances, and then to add on even more cold damage. And when you actually get them all to spawn on top of a monster, let me go find a monster that'll actually survive long enough. You have this big brute right here, and then you have all my channelers, and then each one of them spawns all of these guys, and then all of them fire out a massive amount of these bolts, with the wild shards firing them all around them as well, and each one of them individually fires these bolts. If you use multi-shot with it, each one of them will individually fire off 3 as well, which might be better for concentrating damage as opposed to spreading damage. And these things actually seem like they are meta viable. They seem like you can legitimately keep up a lot of them. The other great thing about them is that, if I'm not mistaken, they're currently working with my expendable army, which is temporary minions have an additional limit to them, and that these things stay around forever. Now, the interesting thing about them staying around forever is that as you continue to move forward, they will continue to fire, with them firing from like supremely far away off screen. And if they are ever unsummoned, you'll see they're firing from over here. If they're ever unsummoned, they will resummon them, meaning that you can use this same swap tech to basically drop them all away and then drop them into the middle of a pack of enemies, where all of a sudden you have all these guys back out and they start dropping their guys. And then I die during my video recording and I look like a idiot. But you can actually use the same swap tech to be able to basically pick them up and drop them off in different areas. At that point, they will respawn the little guys as well. So all of a sudden they respawn their guys start firing out in all directions, and then you have a bunch of minions spawning minions and the propagation goes further. Now, there's a couple issues with them, and you basically need the entire suite of other minions around to be able to give these guys the tanks that they need to make this more viable. But they have low health. They themselves are not particularly fast, so the swap tech almost feels like it is required. And then they're also kind of stupid, where their minions can't really like see around walls or stuff like that. So often if you're in like a really tight hallway or running around corridors and stuff like that, these little guys don't like move, they just kind of stay put. So the swap tech is like really, really required to be able to airdrop them into relevant areas and then have them start spamming. Now, I've played this build in the same way that I've been playing my previous build, where I'm using like Unearth for even more minions. I have the Brute and the Storm Mage and the Frost Mage and the Priests and the Warriors and all of that, and they do decently well. Nowhere near as good as Cocaine Ants. I'm not trying to pretend like they do, but there is something here with how many of these things that you can spawn, how efficient you can make them at being able to apply cold damage, and something that I think that if the Cocaine Ants are ever nerfed in the future, or more ways of being able to support elemental damage from the Witch perspective is available in the passive skill tree or on gear, this looks like a really, really good way to be able to have scalable range damage. And also, since it's purely elemental, that just means, again, if anything comes out that interacts with that elemental damage in particular for our minions, it's there for us. It's an interesting build. It's an interesting way of playing the build. It's basically the exact same thing that you normally do, except you get 5 of these guys instead of the 3 Cocaine Ants that I normally do. And then you just end up running all of the basic minions like you do. Boop, 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 boop. Be able to push their damage even further. I like 2 clerics there at the end with my extra ones, and you just run elemental weakness instead of the chaos resistance curse instead. You just run around, and you got all your boys out, and you go, you find a pack of monsters, and you go like, oh, hey, what's going on here? Oh no, bad guys. And I drop them down all in. They're all air marked in. I get myself a bunch of little minions firing off. It works a lot better in like big open maps where you're not dealing with these hallways and stuff like that. But it's an absolutely like cacophonous amount of projectiles when you have your sound on. So that's one of the things I think are probably going to be worth it to explore in the future. If a Giga Chad who better understands how to scale this damage than I do currently would be willing to share their insights or whatever, let me know down in the comments. I think that this one is interesting. But there you go. I went and collected all 94 of the new Spectres available in Act 4 so that you didn't have to. Went and tested all of them out, did DPS checks, figured out which ones worked and which ones didn't, and came away with that list of like 6 or 7 that are kind of interesting, or even the one, the Ancestral Channeler, that might see some use in the future if it gets a bit more support. But let me know down in the comments if you came across any other interesting interactions. A lot of these Spectres actually have special interactions between particular monsters, so if you have one and the other, they do something. I wasn't able to find any combinations of those here, but it seems like with all the various monster families that we had, there surely should be something. So let me know if you found any. I'd love to hear from you. But that's enough of me yapping. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.